Good afternoon, everyone. This is Deb Wojcik of RTCC. We're going to let some folks in and get started in just a few minutes. Thank you, everyone, for being here. We are letting folks in, and we'll get started in just another minute or two. Thank you to everyone joining us. We're just letting in a few more folks more to join us and along the way, but we'll get started in just 1 minute. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Deb Wojcik, and I'm the Executive Director of the Research Triangle Cleantech Cluster. I am so excited that you have joined us on this snowy for many afternoon to have our amazing panel, Charging Ahead EV Infrastructure Challenges and Opportunities. Thank you so much for your flexibility in moving to this virtual format. Those of you who are familiar with us and our organization know that we love in-person events, and all of us on the panel, we're very excited to be with you in person. And we will be telling you that this motivated us to schedule our next in-person event that will be less than a month from now. But today, the great thing is that we were able to have all of our panelists join us in this format, and even more people than may have been able to join us in person here as participants. So thank you for that. A couple of housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded and we will upload it to our YouTube channel. So that will be available if you want to review it or share with any colleagues. And please feel free to use the Q&A function if you have any questions or comments. So depending on your device, your Q&A should either be at the top or bottom of your screen. If you don't see it, click on the 3 dots to select from more options. And this might take a couple of minutes to load, so please feel free to use that throughout the time, and we'll do our best to get to as many questions as we can. So to get started on the presentations and the content for today, I'm going to tell you first a little bit about RTCC so that you understand the heart of our organization. And Megan, it looks like I think you're going to have to do my forwarding, if you can do that for me. Or do you see the what is Cleantech now?
Nope, I gotcha.
Okay, great. Thank you. So, okay. Do you all see the what is Cleantech slide?
The attendees do, so you're good to go.
Great. Okay. So we just wanted to do some level setting and to share that there are lots of definitions for clean tech, but the way we refer to it is any product, process, or service that reduces environmental impacts through improved energy efficiency, sustainable resource use, environmental protection. So it can include anything from electric vehicles, like the topic today, to renewables, water purification, sustainable agriculture, green building, and much more. So one of the things that we want to make sure we all understand together is that it's really about solutions that create multiple benefits, including for the bottom line. And that's at the heart of what we do. So our vision and mission is really focused on accelerating growth and leadership of the clean tech economy, leveraging the unique concentration of industry, academia, and government leadership here in the Research Triangle. And we really work at the state level and beyond. We have a lot of multinational stakeholders and things. So there's a lot of work that is being done here, and our impact is, in fact, both local, regional, and global. We do this through 3 key organizational goals. One is business development and collaboration, so bringing together businesses for B2B opportunities, collaborating to create those solutions, looking both at the solutions providers and those who need them to meet their goals through innovation in terms of supporting innovation within the landscape, entrepreneurs, startup community, and then education and talent. So amplifying the great work that you all are doing in this space, working through your thought leadership to make sure that that messaging is getting out there, as well as making sure that the talent that we all need is being developed here as well. We do this through what we call the triple helix model of a cluster. So really fostering collaboration between industry, academia, and government to drive clean tech advancements and adoption. So with all of that, I always want to acknowledge and thank our wonderful board members. You'll see they are both industry and academic, and our leadership members. So thank you to all, and to our members, many of whom are here on this call. So we are a membership organization with a broad range of ways for you to become more formally involved. We have membership and sponsorship opportunities for companies large and small. And if you are a member, you can raise your virtual hand and keep it up for a few seconds. I don't know exactly where that is on your screen, but there is a raise hand, so feel free to do that, or just be with us in spirit today as we are all part of this ecosystem in this virtual space. So our members have access to talent programs, committees, you receive marketing and branding benefits, and can tap into our network. We will be rolling out some new membership categories coming up in this quarter, and we're very excited. So I just want to remind you that if you're not already engaged and want to get more engaged, please consider that as an option to more formally engage with us. You can connect with Emmett, Megan, or myself to do that. So with no further ado, it is my great pleasure to introduce our panel members. The way we're going to start this, we have so much to cover, and based on our panel prep call, we could have hours on this panel. We don't have that, and in fact, we understand that you may have some other things going on in your lives that may pull you away. So we want to make sure we concentrate as much great content for you in this format and in this period of time. So we are going to start by having our panel members spend a couple of minutes introducing themselves and their business. And then we're going to have Tom DelViscio from Duke Energy giving us a little overview and framing that's going to help get us in the right frame of mind for this conversation. We'll have a moderated discussion, and then we will open this up for questions. So again, you don't have to hold on to those questions until that time. Feel free to stick them in the Q&A, and we will get to those as soon as we can. Okay, so I'm looking at multiple things at once. So if at any point my team might pop on and make sure I pay attention to something, thank you again. We did kind of have to move over to this format in a hurry, so we really appreciate your attention and your excitement and enthusiasm for this topic. So I'm going to start by introducing Jed Routh. He is Vice President of Markets and Products for North America at Kempower. Jed.
Good afternoon. And I guess you can go to my slides if I'm not seeing them correctly. But want to introduce myself, Jed Routh, VP of Markets and Products at Kempower North America. Megan, I'm not seeing my slides. Am I?
I can click through them for you.
Okay, perfect. So I guess a little bit about Kempower, and then a little bit about kind of where we see the world, and then we'll take questions later. So Kempower comes from a company called Kempi, which is a Finnish company, which is why I chose the background you see today, both in honor of the company and the snow we've had. So Kempi is a DC welding company, and got good at power modules and decided, hey, we should look at EV charging, and through a lot of machinations, develop Kempower as a charging company. So Kempower is kind of wrong technically to say Kempi is our parent company, because Kempower is publicly traded. We're our own company, but Kempi certainly is our founding company and our majority owner. So what we do is we manufacture here in Durham, North Carolina, since 2023. We manufacture DC fast charging systems. So we're Buy America compliant here, and we make most of the Kempower product portfolio. We make a station charger, which is kind of what you're used to, a self-contained station with chargers off it. But we also do a distributed system, which is our power cabinet, and then multiple satellites, which I'll go into a little bit later during the questions, I suspect, but has some advantages around adaptive charging and the ability to give various charging rates to various cars. So I guess what I wanted to talk about today quickly, though, is kind of the European experience and where that's taken us and what we've learned from them, and kind of where we see that going forward in North America. So and we typically follow Europe on EVs by at least a couple of years, in some cases a little more than that. So if you kind of look back, in the early 2000s, and we had this here as well, we had nascent technology, a very few cars, a very few chargers, all kinds of standards, people kind of doing their own thing, and a lot of experimentation, and frankly, a lot of frustration for EV drivers. You move forward a decade, and you had a push for standardization. You had a couple of different standards. You had CHAdeMO for the Asian cars and CCS for most everybody else. And then obviously in North America, we had NACS as well. So that kind of like we solved the first problem. Let's get a standard for charging the vehicles. And then there was a more rapid expansion and a network build out, and more chargers, but they were slow usually and unreliable. And in Europe, a lot of public and private investment in the networks to get that going. And the goal was, we need more, and we need more reliable, and we need faster. And I think in the 2020s, those solutions have come. So, now you can buy a Lucid or a Porsche Taycan or a lot of the Teslas where you're charging upwards of 300 kilowatts. And certainly you see more chargers on the road. And certainly the chargers, although they're not perfect, are much more reliable. And so we've kind of solved one problem at a time. We can get the standard, get those chargers out there, make them faster, make them better. And I think now that kind of brings us to the last problem, which I suspect the whole panel will talk about, and Tom will talk about that as well, is like, you now have to figure out just where the power comes from to get that lot of power requested in a short amount of time into the vehicle. And I think we'll talk about that today, and the opportunities and the challenges we see around that. So thank you for the time, and I'll be back around in the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Jed. I appreciate that very much. And it's a great overview. And it's amazing that this is all happening right in our backyard, right here in the Triangle. If you haven't been out to Kempower, I don't want to invite on everyone to get to Jed's place of work, but it is amazing to see how incredible it is to have these fast chargers produced right here. It's quite remarkable and impressive. Okay, so for our next speaker, we're going to be hearing from Emily Belding, Utility and Policy Engagement Associate associate at IONNA. Thank you, Emily.
Thanks so much, Deb. Yeah, you can go ahead to the next slide. I think Megan's still driving for me. Thanks. Yeah, so IONNA, we are a relatively new fast EV charging company. So we do public fast charging, but we have 8 founding partners here who probably are very familiar names to all of you. They're global automakers. That's BMW, GM, Honda, Hyundai, Kia, Mercedes-Benz, Stellantis, and Toyota. So we can go ahead to the next slide. I'll give you a little more information. IONNA's mission is really to open all the roads in North America to EVs. We're focused on the top 50 metro areas and connecting corridors. In kind of year one, we're on an exponential growth curve here. So we have over 100 sites contracted. Our mission is over 1,000 charging bays live by the end of the year and 30,000 by the end of 2030. Our mission is to provide coverage drivers need, but we're really focused on reliability and amenities. So we're really a driver-centered experience at IONNA. We can go to the next slide. And I just wanted to highlight, these are 6 of our sites that are live right now. As you can see, our first site was in Apex, North Carolina, so close here. Our headquarters is in the Raleigh-Durham area here in the Triangle. So happy to be in the Carolinas. Across the IONNA sites, some of them we own both the chargers as well as the amenities that are going to be at all of our sites. And some we are partnered for the amenities. But regardless, the most important thing with IONNA is just that we provide that reliable full service experience to our customers. So in Apex, we own both the chargers and the building there. We worked really closely with economic development, and we have a local businesswoman running a coffee shop out of there. In Abilene, we're near a local restaurant. Houston, a bigger shopping area with Starbucks nearby, and we've got some partnerships going with Sheetz and more in the works. So that's just a little taste of IONNA. And on the next slide, I just want to highlight the IONNA experience. What makes us different is we're really focused on having all of these amenities available when you pull up. So we want to be able to be the full service stop when you're stopping on the road to do that fast charging, having food and beverage, lounges, restrooms, having those canopies and lighting are essential to provide that safety and security and Wi-Fi needs. So IONNA is all about providing that customer first experience. And I can happy to dive in more, but I know we got a lot coming on the panel, so I can kind of just pause there for now, and happy to be here and chat with you all about IONNA.
Thank you, Emily. It's wonderful to have IONNA here and a presence that started here. I know this was a very big economic development announcement recently, and we're so excited to see that it's already coming to fruition. So thank you for that, and thank you for being here today. Now we'll move on to Jacob Bolin, Electric Transportation Specialist at Advanced Energy. Thank you, Jacob.
Yeah, thanks so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Really happy to be here today. I'll just quickly run through an introduction of Advanced Energy. Really excited to have some newer manufacturers, here in North Carolina specifically, and Jed, at least newer kind of stateside. Advanced Energy, on the other hand, we've been around for quite a while. So we were formed out of the Public Utilities Commission of North Carolina back in 1980. Our main goal is to basically just help customers reduce their energy costs and decarbonize. So we've been doing that for quite a while. I don't know what has happened to some of these electric transportation relics. I wish I do, but we've been kind of working in the space for a while. And you can go ahead and go to the next slide. So we're not really doing any kind of fuel conversions these days with our own vehicles, but we're still really actively involved in the electric transportation market. So for us, that really kind of revolves around 3 main buckets. Outreach, education, and stakeholder engagement being one. The most primary kind of platform or channel for that is going to be through Plug-in NC, which is a public-facing EV, essentially outreach brand that is managed by Advanced Energy, but we've got all sorts of support and collaboration with partners, many of whom are on this call. So it's really just an opportunity to engage with the general public and overcome maybe some of the misinformation or misconceptions that are still out there. We're also helping our customers, again, decarbonize and reduce the energy cost. And so we're working with businesses, organizations, local governments, and others to help with EV infrastructure planning and determining how many stations they might need, what some of the hardware, software, selection should look like, and some of the other kind of attributes of their own charging environment. And then we're also technical partners. So we're helping with program design, consultation, and evaluation, currently actually with quite a bit of electric school bus work. So this is not a picture from today, but a recent snowy school bus day. But yeah, really excited to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Jacob. It's a great pleasure to have your perspective with all of these different partners and those opportunities for collaboration. So last but not least, Tom DelViscio is going to be introducing himself and then giving us a framing presentation about the emerging reality from the EV adoption, fleet electrification, utility planning perspective. And he's going to take the next few minutes to do that, and then we're going to dive into our conversation. But if his slides are any indication, it's going to be a fun little ride here. So I'll turn it over to you, Tom. Thank you for being with us.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks, Deb, for having us all here to kind of come together on conversation. My name is Tom DelViscio. I am a Regional Electrification Manager here at Duke Energy, and I'm part of a dedicated team that supports primarily two lines of business here at Duke. We are externally focused on both our fleet, public and private customers that we work with across all jurisdictions, which are North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida, and the Midwest. And then also our public fast charging partners or charge point operators. So your IONNAs, your Teslas, your EVGos. And so in that experience on this team through which is called Transportation Electrification Grid Readiness, we really try to be the front edge of this nascent market and the sort of the utility partner that's important, but almost sort of quietly supportive of all of these activities, and are here to really help shepherd in some of this development and accelerate and remove barriers to interconnection electrification as we can throughout this marketplace. So what I like to do when I'm talking about framing a conversation is I like to say that sometimes when you want to frame the future, you have to look actually backwards, and history tends to be cyclic, even more so if you don't attend to it. So I have a picture up here, and this is a picture that is basically at the dawn of automobiles. Nothing was decided. This was completely new in every way. And so two pictures are here. These are early models from right around the same time. And usually when I do this in person, we have a little bit of a survey, but if you take a look at the screen, there are two different types of vehicles with two different types of fuel. And so I'll just ask the audience without getting a survey in place to look at those, scrutinize, and try to figure out, one, what you think the fuel source is, and two, which is which. I'll give you a second. And I'm not grading this, so you just pick your favorite. Okay, so I'll give you the answer. Both of these vehicles came out around late 1800s, 1880s, 1890s. And the vehicle on the right-hand side, or on the left-hand side of the screen, the three-wheeler, is actually a Carl Benz design, and it is a gas-fueled vehicle. And the vehicle on the right-hand side is 1888, a German design by a gentleman named Andreas Flocken, and it is the Flocken Electrowagen. And these both came out about the same time. So you can see that obviously it's not that we had one for a long time and another we didn't have any experience with. So that's very interesting. You can go to the next slide and we'll sort of dig into this a little bit. Fascinating thing about how technology is, how technology sort of gains prominence in our marketplace. I was doing some research on this because I thought it was fascinating. There was primarily really three technologies or fuel systems that competed in the beginning, and it was steam, gasoline, and electricity. And there was a study done in Nature Energy by a group, Hannah Nielsen is the author, and what they basically did is they modeled all the conditions that were on the ground at that time, at the beginning of the age of automobiles. And they made comparisons between these different technologies and where they were and how they competed. And interestingly, what they found on the gas and electric side of things is that it was by and large cost parity between the models that were available at the time. And actually, electric were a little bit higher end, and that's primarily because they were more a city dwelling type of vehicle. And that was primarily because there's better roads available and they were quieter and cleaner. And so there was a pushback on some industrialization and dirtiness. And so they were actually selected for urban areas and gas for less urban areas. They had similar operating ranges. And their average range increase was actually in lockstep. So the technology was really competing up into the end. When she tuned the model forward, what they found is the primary reason that gasoline won over electric at the time was infrastructure. And so if they tuned the model forward by just 15 to 20 years, the model showed that electric may have actually won the battle and we could have all been driving electric vehicles for the last 100 years, which is fascinating. Next slide. So I bring this up. Those who cannot remember the past are sometimes doomed to repeat it. And obviously, this is an interaction between everyone in this ecosystem, including the folks on this panel. But to forget the role of the utility as the power partner is, I think, a big mistake and threatens the future of the marketplace. And so every single presentation I always give, I always make a point to make that point emphatically. Next slide. So the EV market. So I'm going to do a breeze through on a quick update. And part of this is to sort of talk about what the public sees in terms of sort of industry and news media and what the actual trends are for both the United States and also globally speaking. Next slide. So there's a lot of information here, but the first point I just kind of made, which is, whenever there's a new technology and there's rapid adoption, the news media typically gets excited and the industry media typically gets excited and social media goes crazy. And then when things change, there's often a assumption that there's a big shift in the market. And primarily adoption curves follow similar tracks for most products, whereas in the beginning, there's often some early adopters and they rapidly accelerate, and then there's sort of a settling in the market and then a slow and steady rise and a tipping point. So as you can see from the slide, across different metrics and data sets, the growth of EVs is consistent and growing across both in the US and across most of the world. Next slide. Chose to focus in a little bit on plug-in vehicle growth over time. I know it's hard to see, but that's really kind of a growth curve, from 10 plus years ago all the way to the current day. And you can see obviously the exponential growth in the plug-in marketplace, and that's also, full battery electric and also plug-in vehicles. And then there's some more information there on sort of growth in the US marketplace. Next slide. Okay, I wanted to break this out between 2012 and 2024. And again, lots of information here, but really the main focus is if you look at the growth, it's exponential. But if you look at the components of the growth, you can see that China is absolutely dominating in this regard. Europe follows next, and then we are a portion. And I think we're a portion because of our size, not necessarily because of our speed of adoption. So really the bottom line here is the growth in this marketplace is huge, and we're falling behind a bit here. Next slide. Dig down a little bit more into sort of the Southeast. I've got some trend lines and looking at growth across from 2020 to 2024 across a number of Southeastern states. And then there's a slide up there, and you can see that really it's not just about putting plugs in the ground or selling vehicles. There's an incredible ecosystem down here in the Southeast. And obviously, we have great representation on the call from a number of those folks that are driving this market. But this is a big business and a very important business in terms of decarbonizing and bringing real jobs and clean energy to the area. Next slide. A little bit more there. This is a port, look at sort of our port growth in the Southeast. And you can see that really has been following the adoption trend as well. North Carolina is doing pretty good. We had year-over-year growth of almost 50% on DCFC. And then 44% on this particular metric. Next slide. Okay, so kind of bringing it together a little bit here. Next slide. I like to speak in equivalencies. It really helps, I think, for sort of conveying what the situation is with this marketplace. And this is one of the things we think about heavily on the utility side of the equation. So for better or for worse, the electric utilities in this country have made it pretty easy to connect and power electric devices. And so most people think, well, you just get it and you plug it in. That's all there is to it. But to give you a sense of scale, if you were to plug in your EV charger at home, for us on the grid, that could be the equivalency of adding another dryer or an electric stove. Okay, so adding a stove for a house or a dryer, no big deal. But if you're in a neighborhood that has hundreds and hundreds of homes and everybody throws in a new electric stove or dryer, then that can actually cause some issues on the grid. If you get into the bigger vehicles, like the trucks that are starting to come onto the market, the Lightning and the Silverado, you go ahead and increase that to the equivalency of a whole house HVAC system. Keep on going, and you got your box trucks, your last mile deliveries, you got 50 kW chargers, and now we're talking about a whole apartment complex potentially. And then you take the last one, the semis, and 150 kW for a charger is really underselling the size of these potential chargers. I'll get into that in a second, but you can be talking about a large fast food restaurant for every single plug we put on the grid. Next slide. Okay, and here's where we are going. And there's asterisks to all this, but megawatt charging is essentially being able to put the power of very, very sizable assets into one plug. And so the equivalency here you can see is for 1 megawatt charger, it could be enough to power 800 homes, 200 or 20 fast chargers, 150 level 2s, or 25 overnight depot chargers. So in one plug, an incredible amount of energy potential. Next slide. Okay, a little bit more equivalency. This is sort of gives you a sense of scale, and this runs through, if you got retail applications or just regular cars on the road versus box trucks versus transit buses versus big rigs, you can see how they stack out. Now, you can probably put in, if you had no barriers or constraints for the last one, for the semis, you can probably put in a depot location in a year and a half to two, depending on your planning. Now, compare that to the time it took to build the Empire State Building, and you'll get a sense of how urgent some of this can be. Okay, next slide. Okay, and I'm just going to end out here with a really quick sort of rapid progression through what I like to call the opportunity and the challenge. As this market grows, there is absolute grid impact. And so Duke Energy and other utilities are working internally, working between each other, and looking to the industry for understanding and data as to adoption, so that we're better able to prepare and strategically invest in supporting this market. And so this is what's called an e-roadmap, and it's from EPRI, the Electric Power Research Institute, and they are collecting industry data from from OEMs and from fleet operators and from utilities, and they're putting that all together with a lot of different factors to try to get at a sort of almost a sort of a prediction level, down to the grid level equivalency, so that we're better able to plan together as an industry. The hexes that you see represent megawatt hours of energy, and you can see the scale, essentially light to dark, it gets heavier. And just to give you a sense of what a megawatt hour is, I have a few more equivalencies. So a megawatt hour could power an average American home for about 1.2 months. You can drive an electric vehicle for about 3,600 miles. You could power two 60-watt light bulbs nonstop for a year. You could smelt 137 pounds of aluminum, if you're into that kind of thing, or you could toast about 90,000 slices of bread with that equivalent energy, and that's 1 megawatt hour. So what we're going to do is we're going to just quickly cycle through. Now, this base case is 2025 adoption in the Southeast. Next slide. Okay, if we go to the next slide, this is going to be 2026. Next slide. Okay, 2027. Next slide. 2028. Next slide. 2029. Next slide. Okay, let me see. Make sure I'm syncing up here. And that's 2030, I think. All right, so we're at 2030. All right, and this is a conservative approach to forecasting. If we went to the next slide, I'm going to show you where the EV chargers locations are in 2030. And so you can see by and large, the access and opportunity to use electric vehicle charging is primarily grouped within those adoption centers, which makes sense. But EVs are cars, are vehicles by nature, and they want to travel. And so you need to also look at the corridors that interconnect those areas as well. And if you go to the next slide, would be a full adoption picture of potentially everything that's on the road that could possibly electrify by 2030 if it actually came to pass. And so you can imagine the challenges for any utility that's trying to serve this load across its jurisdictions. And this is, investor-owned utilities like Duke Energy, or is it municipal utilities, or it's the co-ops as well. Okay, next slide. I wanted to just put up the census, Justice 40 census track. So you can see between that and the last slide, there's obviously a lot of areas that don't have access to this kind of development and technology. And if you click to the last slide here in the cycle, these have been deemed transportation disadvantaged tracks, the census tracks. So again, same pattern here where there are opportunities to electrify and change over to new technology, but by and large, it will sometimes pass rural areas that don't have access to resources in general, which is something we need to work on. Okay, and I think that's my last slide.
Thank you so much, Tom. We really appreciate that. I love the pictures and that thinking of what could the world have been like had we made some different decisions early on. So with that in mind, we have lots of decisions going forward. I am going to transition us now. We're going to actually come off of the slides, I believe, and bring our panelists up, because we're going to go into a moderated panel session now. And we are going to just to have some questions for everyone. We're going to have some individual questions. And then again, remember that your questions, I have seen a few come through already. We're going to come to those afterwards. We'll do our best to get to all of them. And we are just make sure you're using the Q&A function within your Teams screen. And our hope really was to be able to have a very interactive dialogue. As you know, that can be a little bit trickier virtually, but just for the panelists, if we can just remind ourselves that if there are things to add, even if I don't address you in that question, I may not see you trying to speak up, so just talk over me or just jump in. So Megan, I think we're able to pull up all the panelists now, and we'll take off the slides so that we can just see each other and everyone can kind of see this. Hopefully it'll make it a little bit more like we're there in the same room. So just to get us started, we've heard some things about some of the collaborations required, and we know that there's a lot there. So to start, what collaborative efforts between utilities, manufacturers, and developers are essential for overcoming current infrastructure challenges? Do we have some examples that we can share where collaboration with various stakeholders have led to successful project deployments? I'm actually going to go ahead and start with Jed, if that's okay, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. So I guess I don't know about going in. Maybe I go general and everybody else can go specific. But I think back to Tom's question. I mean, and let me just use fleets as an example because I think it's a really instructive one. So typically, you've got a person who's really good at their job, who's been running fleets for a long time, and they've got everything set up, right? You've got your fueling infrastructure, your labor, your vehicles, and everything else. And all of that is mature and has a process that's long developed. And then you throw this in there, and suddenly it's not just that those things change. So now you have different vehicles, different training, different labor, different driver habits, but you get these new players involved. And so I think that educating everybody on what that is like step one when you talk about successful deployment. So suddenly you may have a person who they don't have a large account rep for the utility. They've never even spoken to the utility unless they've done construction on their site. And suddenly now you go back to Tom's slide and you need enough power to do, I think they said at our site, it was a super Walmart was what we did at our site, that kind of equivalent power. And people just don't understand, when you build a house, power company comes and you get power. They don't understand that it's not the same thing. It's a different kind of scale. So I think that the first thing we can do for successful collaboration is just let people know you start way before you think you start. You don't just order a vehicle and suddenly everything just appears. That there's a lot of successful planning. And the folks that I've seen do it well have really just had that. They've said, talk to me like I'm a third grader. Start me off for this. There's no dumb questions. And I think probably anybody on this panel would do that for someone. And then once you get that baseline, then I think you can have a successful deployment.
Jed, I think that's a really important piece, right? That education, making sure that there's level setting at the beginning. And I think, right, we're all learning as we go. Emily, you gave a couple of examples about some of those partnerships on site, trying to make sure that all of the amenities that someone needs are important. We did a panel at one point, probably a little over a year ago, and someone said, I am an EV owner. I'm a single woman who needs to get out and walk their dog, and often the chargers are off to the side and I don't feel safe. And it seems like you've really made that a priority. Can you speak a little bit more to that and any examples that you would like to share?
Sure, of course. So, of course, kind of the initial things folks think about when they think of EV charging is focusing on the utility connection infrastructure and then permitting. Those are, of course, the biggest challenges, and early collaboration with those entities, so the authorities having jurisdiction over permitting and utilities, like working with Tom's team, is essential to deploying stations. But as you said, that's kind of where the structural side is focused, but we really also focus on what is the customer need. And that's something that drew me to IONNA as well. And something we really look for is when you're just talking to a friend or a colleague or family and talking about EV challenges, one of the things you do hear a lot is, well, I'd love to charge, but I don't know where I'd go. I don't have time to, sit outside, maybe a building. Sometimes the EV charging is way in the back of the parking lot in the dark, and you've got your kids and it's late at night and you don't really feel like that's a reliable, safe charging experience. So if we want to encourage EV adoption, we have to make that reliable consumer experience kind of the baseline, give the amenity service. So what's really important to us in working with the local economic development groups and things like that, and connecting with local businesses where they have an idea of, this is where this service would really be needed and is key. We've got a great site acquisition team, looking to find these sites where we're really targeted in terms of both there's demand and there's also access to the amenities. So it's a really collaborative effort on just getting all hands on deck early and keeping kind of a holistic approach when we're engaging a city, not only talking to the permitting folks, but also talking to development, talking to sustainability, trying to figure out what's the bigger picture and goals of that area as well, that city or county, and making sure that IONNA is, providing that full service and meeting kind of the needs of the community.
Yeah, thanks for that. We've heard some about where towns are integrating some of their charging infrastructure into their main street tourism type efforts as well. So it's a really interesting.
Yeah. So for example, close by here, we had our ribbon cutting in Apex just a couple of weeks ago. We're right in downtown Apex. That site is great. It was historic. Traditional gas station, fueling station in its past life had shut down, and now we've revived it as an EV charging station. We're right in kind of the historic downtown Apex, which has seen a lot of really great growth. It's incredible being someone growing up in this area, seeing how everything's kind of come back to life in those downtowns, and we want to be a part of that as well. So revitalizing those communities where you can just walk down from our station to the co-working and coffee shop there, or you could walk down the street to one of the many restaurants in Apex, do shopping. So that's kind of a key part of our brand and experience as well. And that's what consumers want,
Well, and I think just tying what you said and what Jed said together, right? It's all about those connections early, trying to figure out what the needs are, both in terms of the energy demand side as well as in terms of the consumer side. So that's really helpful. Jacob, do you have example? I know you work at a broader scale. Do you have other examples that you would like to share?
Yeah, I'll just jump in and mention that level of collaboration doesn't stop when the stations are commissioned, and you see an indicator light that now says that, you're good to charge. I think that when you have all these different partnerships, that's really, really important. And it's important post install as you're really thinking about like how these different partners can actually have accountability to make sure that those solutions continue to work. I mean, Emily spoke to the reliability piece. You want to make sure that you don't leave a site host or a customer in a situation where there's a lot of finger pointing like between these partners. So having good levels of accountability and also having some opportunity to mitigate or kind of like have an actual platform where particular errors or faults can be discussed in a way that's not about designating fault or blame, but is really about like making sure that reliability metric, however you choose to measure it, is always getting better. So I think that there's tons of benefit to these really kind of like multi-partner relationships, but we just have to make sure that we don't leave those customers stranded with kind of a very fractured system afterwards too.
Great point. Thank you. And Tom, I think people have been referring to your side of the equation here. Would you like to add anything from the utility perspective in terms of that early communication and collaboration?
Sure, absolutely. And yeah, so and actually comments from all the panelists, I'll try to kind of tie that together and say that, if you think about it, people often talk and industry often talks about how the utility industry can be a potential barrier to this kind of adoption. But if you step back and think about that and you say that the electric utility doesn't want electric vehicles to get onto the grid, it's kind of a head scratcher. And I think one of the things we like to talk about early is, for the residential market, by and large, people are plugging in at home and charging overnight. That is a period in which the grid is low utilization. So that actually helps fill out the picture of our load profile, how we operate our system. We'd rather operate everything on cruise control, just like you'd like to do on your car, on the highway versus stop and go traffic. And so it actually does fill out part of the picture that's beneficial for us. And as more comes on, we can better utilize assets and then hopefully put downward pressure on rates as we get more and more cars on the grid. And tying it together, so it's definitely an evolving space. And so, Jacob had mentioned it's not just, and Jed too, not just about the initial deployment. The project is in, it's going, we're done, and we're moving forward. Electrons by nature are flexible fuels, and so you can do more with this system than you can with the traditional system. And so a good example, and Jacob's well involved in this, and Jed as well, comes with sort of fleet charging, and specifically, let's talk about electric school buses. So the EPA put out, a lot of money over the last few years to support the adoption of new technology. Now, new technology is always more expensive because you have to develop it, you have to build out process lines, you have to, there's a lot of costs that go into it. And then for the electric vehicle market, and Jed mentioned this, there's a lot of education for the end user. They're not used to this. And that's also with Emily and IONNA too. Like if you got your first EV and you're trying to figure out how to operate a filling station for electric vehicles, it can be a little challenging. Mm-hmm. So like I said, it's not just about the project, it's about sort of building the relationship over time. And for the electric school bus situation, when the EPA put out those initial awards, they didn't have a requirement to talk to utilities. They thought it was just, I believe they thought it was just going to happen organically, and it didn't in a lot of situations. And so that actually put end users, school districts, in a position where they would get buses and had no idea how to actually connect them to the grid. And so they changed their tact over time and brought in utility partners like us and others to say, hey, we need some sort of form of cooperation. If you take that and say, okay, we got the project in, and you extend that down the line, and this is for really all EVs, they are unique in their sort of load characteristics. they are variable loads, they're controllable. You can do a lot more with EVs than you can with a traditional building, let's say. So for the school buses, you put in a few electric school buses now, you get some EPA money. Working with the utility is going to help you figure out what rate you need to be on to have your lowest cost of operation going forward. And as we move forward in technology, working with that customer and then also groups like Jacobs and other industry partners, putting in things like V2G programs where you can actually take energy from the vehicle and use it to backfeed the grid during periods of peak constraint where we have our highest demand, is a way to really bring value to the customers, but also bring value to the grid and hopefully avoid costly upgrades and decarbonize as well. So full picture, it really is quite an ecosystem of connection. We really need to be, that education is going to take years to sort of get fluid with and to understand, and it's always evolving.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you for weaving those things together. Emily, I'm going to come to you with an individual question specific to IONNA. How are you engaging with local authorities? You mentioned permitting and that being a key part. How are you working with local authorities to address permitting challenges that are posed by the rapid adoption of EVs in North Carolina?
Yeah, for sure. That's one of our biggest challenges, one of the biggest things we're focused on right now. The best thing is kind of what we mentioned before is collaboration. So right now we're reaching out to kind of every AHJ where we're working. So AHJ is just the authority having jurisdiction, being like the city or the county who would provide the building permit and things like that. But like I said, it's got to be a holistic engagement. So we're talking to folks in permitting, we're talking to folks in building, and we're talking to folks in economic development as well. But one of the things I do want to highlight is an EV charging station is not a gas station. So we don't have the same fueling concerns. And a lot of the challenges right now is that there's not always a clearly defined use case for EV charging infrastructure in building codes right now. So sometimes, we might get initially told you're a fueling station, or no, you're something different. And so I think one of the challenges there is, working together at the state level and at the city and county level to define a use for EV charging infrastructure as both a primary use and an accessory use. And by that, I mean, if our main focus is like, if it is mainly a gas station, maybe it's primarily a gas station. So we maybe be primarily fueling. But if we've got a lot of amenities, maybe the EV is considered an accessory. So that ends up in a different place in building code. So we want to make sure we clearly define both of those. And a lot of folks are working on redefining the code. The thing I would caveat that with is, let's not wait for new code to be finalized to start developing EV charging infrastructure. The EV infrastructure we're trying to roll out now is to meet today's demand. It's not for, future 2030 state will need more, as Tom showed in his great visuals. It's going to be way, way more if we're trying to meet full demand. So we want to keep moving. And I guess an example of some of this kind of work is in Florida, they passed some legislation in the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services bill, SB 1084, about preempting EV kind of code to the state level rather than city and county. And one of the requirements is that all levels of EVSE installed at the charging stations would be approved in all zoning districts, absent health and safety concern, if it's an accessory use, and approved as a primary use in commercial and industrial zoning, and also giving a time limit on permitting to 30 days. So one of the challenges as well is long permit turnaround timelines, feedback, things like that. It can be difficult to move projects forward. So that's something that we encourage, whether it's at the state level or county level, just looking into kind of defining EV as a use. And in the meantime, just being collaborative and working together with us. And we've had a lot of HJs, we're very hands-on, and they've helped us work through existing code. But when it's not clear cut, it just takes a little more time sometimes to kind of work with folks. So that's a big thing. And just bouncing off what Tom said as well on the infrastructure side, it's really great when we can connect with utilities and folks like Tom's team, because while we're doing permitting, they like to know, well, do you have power at the utility before we're too worried about getting your permit along quickly? So we want to have those coordinating in parallel. And when a lot of utilities now have dedicated staff, and more encouraging more and more, like Tom's team, where they're focused on this transportation electrification, because I think there's still kind of this myth maybe or misconception that there's no room for charging infrastructure right now. And a study I just saw from Duke University, actually from the Nicholas Institute, was showing how much capacity is available on the grid right now, especially if you kind of just take out like the 1% of the max uptime. So a lot of times what Tom's team will do is if we're bringing on a site, he's able to work with engineers and look and see a flexible load strategy. See, would this work for a site? And we can move forward in the next, couple months or a year. You don't have to wait 3-4 years just to get started. And there's a lot of utilities work on these programs. California PG&E has an exciting Flex Connect pilot program. So just encouraging that kind of hands-on look and not just kind of addressing that misconception that, there's no power available today. And as Tom said, where we're an up and down use, we're not a constant. We're not going to be pulling full power at every time the way maybe a factory or industry would. So we're able to kind of work really well with that load management.
That's a great point, Emily. And, it is interesting because there is a general narrative around demand and load growth and the increase there. But being able to kind of not have that all be one narrative, but really parse that out is really helpful. I will say, and Tom, I was going to go to you on this because I think it's good for you to also speak to that point, but also there is a Duke Energy Carolinas kind of thinking about this in terms of demand while managing decommissioning and aging traditional energy assets. So can you just speak to how you're thinking about this? You've already said a little bit about this variable demand and some of the flexibility. Can you dive into that a little deeper?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. It's a good question, and thanks, Emily, for bringing up that recent study there. The way that the grid works, just to give a really high level, is that it's really built for reliability and lowest cost. And that is the sort of the mandate, especially for regulated utilities like ours, from our commission. They determine the priorities, and really, historically, it's been reliability and cost effectiveness. Clean has entered the equation, and Duke has been making efforts in that direction for many, many years. But now that we have various legislation and other sort of push and pressure on that direction, it's accelerated. And so, as you were mentioning, Deb, when you take out traditional assets like coal generation and you retire a fleet that has, gigawatts of power associated with it, you have to replace it with something, and you have to replace it with something that's hopefully cleaner, if not carbon neutral. That takes time and investment. And so during that period, those are really big projects and really long timelines and things that are planned out years in advance. If during that time you're starting to see explosive load growth and you're starting to see, what we call spot loads or potential project deployments that are really large compared to what we traditionally see, we have to try to sort of figure out the engineering on our smaller lines or our distribution grid. How can we serve this while not doing damage and affecting reliability, and also not affecting costs for the general customers and ratepayers, but also getting the customer who's asking for that support on the grid without any delay or excess cost? So that's a really tough equation to navigate. But since we do build it essentially for worst case scenario, worst case, worst day, we build it with some room. We call headroom on the system. And so in the example that Emily gave, and also what Jed was talking about earlier, sort of the balancing controls of some of their technology, we can say, hey, listen, if everything was plugged in all at once, it would represent more load than a super Walmart. But if we actually look at the data, if we really consider operational patterns, if we understand the equipment, we could say, yeah, okay, that's potential, but statistically improbable / impossible. And if that's the case, how do we function in your equipment and your operational patterns onto what we already have in our system and try to maximally utilize that equipment? And so what we do there is we pave the way for the current customer to get on. And I think you're going to progressively see this over time. Utilities are going to be sort of the air traffic control, sort of orchestrating all of these things as they go. Energy flows one way, this way. And we're putting a lot of automation into the system to do that. And some folks have seen the benefit of that over the last day or two as branches come down, hit lines, and power reroutes automatically and get your lights back on within minutes, if less. You're going to start to see this in sort of power flow for equipment. And EVs are a huge part of how we're going to intermingle and intermix all of this competing interest. And so that's sort of the simplest way I can describe it. But that's a really an opportunity to work with the markets represented here on the call to have them understand how we function, understand how they function, and then to sort of interlace these things together for mutual benefit.
Well, speaking of, and I do think I want to move to Jed and ask him a question, because part of this is the technology itself, right? And innovations in the technology bring these new, better chargers as well that have more predictive analytics, as well as their ability to be more flexible. So, Jed, can you speak to any new technologies or products that Kempower is focusing on to enhance the EV charging experience and work with that infrastructure reliability?
Yeah, so just kind of walking right into what they said, we really believe strongly in dynamic charging. Pretty much all our product lines have it. And just what that means is if you took a traditional kind of setup and maybe it's got 400 kilowatts of power there and it's divided into 4 plugs of 100 each. If I pulled up in a Nissan Leaf that only needed 25, could only take 25 kilowatts, I've still got 100 allocated to me. So I've wasted kind of 70 kilowatts of that station's potential. And if I put in a Lucid or something that could take 300, well, I can't get it because I can only access 100. So now I've wasted 200 kilowatts of my potential in my car. And we try to design our products where we can kind of take advantage of what the car needs. And so if you were in our system, you'd pull up in the Leaf and it'd give you the 25, and you pull up in the Lucid and it'd give you the 300. And then we're also sensitive to the curve. So I drive an AV, I drive a Mustang Mach-E. And if you look at like a rating, it'll tell you something like 150 kilowatts, but I've never really seen that. Usually about 120 is as good as I can do, and I get that for 3 minutes, and then the curve goes down. Well, we sense that. We say, okay, now wait, Jed's car only needs 100 right now. Let's back that off to 100, and let's give Emily's car some more. And so we believe when we do that we're maximizing the potential of the station itself. And maybe you don't have to buy as much. Maybe you can get by with a 600 kilowatt station instead of a megawatt. So there's that part of it. And then I think the other thing we've seen with studies from our European colleagues is as the proliferation happens, it's really important to maximize the number of plugs you have. Because you get 2 things. You get, number one, I can't find a station, and that's the most frustrating thing ever. And number 2, if I can just be charging, if I can. And so we try to say, let's spread that out. So we're continually trying to grow the amount of plugs that we can have in one station. Right now, we can do 8 with one station, add another station, do 8 more, but we're moving that to 12 and then 16. And the same thing for fleets. It's kind of a little reversed, but instead of, all night long, I can charge maybe at a constant rate. As this vehicle gets through, I can move it to the next, and I don't have to have quite as big a system. Of course, we're all into more power. I mean, despite some of the considerations, we're developing megawatt charging for fleets and things like that, but with the same technology, so that you don't have to charge as much, as long. You can spread it out more. And that's kind of the general thought, to kind of be players, and be nice partners with the utilities and everything. If we've got that kind of technology, I think it's good for us, good for utility, good for the customer.
Thank you, Jed. Well, you led us right into Jacob. I'm looking at the 2 questions I have for you, and I almost want to ask you both at the same time if I can. So Jed just spoke to fleets, and I'd love to hear from you about the role advanced energy is playing in supporting fleet managers in their transitions to EVs. And then at the same time, we were talking, Jed's talking about the scale of the chargers, right? Or charging clusters. But what else is advanced energy doing when you scale that up to enhance the efficiency and reach of North Carolina's EV charging network more broadly? So those are 2 big questions, but if I can challenge you to kind of speak to both, I think it all does intertwine a little bit here.
Yeah, sure. I'll ramble a little bit, Deb, but no, that seems good. Yeah, I think in terms of what Advanced Energy is doing, I mean, ultimately, we just want to help customers make the right infrastructure decisions for them. And ultimately, that's about how many stations they might need, when they should deploy those stations, and how they might be able to cost effectively, deploy them in batches, and also future-proof and prepare to basically make that a much easier process down the road. One of the things that we really believe in Advanced Energy is that this really is an iterative process. So you want to make sure that you know what you're up to. You want to be well informed going into your decision making. But the more that you deploy, the more that you learn about what you need and what your teammates need in order to charge, and what those use cases look like. And instead of having a really robust 50-year plan, which is very, very important, you actually can make those decisions in a little bit more real time around like, okay, what do we actually need next and why? So we just want to help customers make those decisions to be well informed, and ultimately we want to help mitigate risk, right? We don't want assets to be stranded for customers. And so that means really thinking about what it takes to select the right networking platforms, and also the right hardware, and where to build in some of that redundancy. I think a big part of that, I mean, obviously from a light duty perspective, we need a lot more fast charging, right? Like I drive an EV. I love to road trip. Like there are all sorts of spots from Tom's map where there are huge gaps, and I'm really excited about everything that these manufacturers and charge point operators are doing to deploy that fast charging. One of the things that I learned today, though, in addition to the fact that 1 megawatt is about 90,000 pieces of toast, is that you can deploy a whole lot of level 2 stations in ways. And so the high power fast charging model is really, really important, but we really want to complement that, especially in a fleet use case when we can, because if you're overnight charging, if you've got dwell times of 6, 8, 12 hours, there's a lot of opportunity for level 2 charging, or even higher power level 2 charging, as Tom mentioned, with the F-150 Lightning, being able to accept about 20 kW. So there are a lot of different options, and there are a lot of different ways to kind of blend those together. It does take, especially from a DC fast charging model, those smart kind of load balancing capabilities. And from a level 2 perspective, there are hardware decisions that you can make that will also balance that, just in the theory of like how you're actually choosing to put infrastructure in the ground. So we just want to make sure that those decisions are made in well-informed manners to achieve whatever fleet goals you might have in those particular use cases. Now, I guess the second part of your question, Deb, is kind of like what else we're doing to kind of help with that, and thinking about what's next. As Tom mentioned, we are supporting Duke Energy's pilot program for their school bus component with a vehicle to grid evaluation. So that's a regulated pilot program. So I don't want to share too much about like specifics in terms of what we pushed through so far. I'll let Duke Energy kind of do that when the time is right. But we are seeing an opportunity to actually leverage this equipment in new ways. Something that's not breaking news is the fact that these use cases in unmanaged scenarios are not what's best. And so these technologies can really be managed, but there is real urgency to do it the right way, because in an unmanaged scenario, it's just not going to work out that well. I mean, you can think about it with a school bus. The school bus finishes their morning route at 8 o'clock in the morning, they're getting back to plug in, or they finish their afternoon route at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, in August when schools just come back in session. These are really high traffic jam periods, right, for the utility. And so that's a really important time. So we're working with different partners to make sure that we understand what those charging patterns are, and also work to kind of really engage with customers in the right types of programs to make sure that they're at the table to know what works well for them too, in terms of rate options, or some other type of managed charging program. One other thing that I'll mention here is that these things are also true in the residential kind of space. You don't have the huge load concerns, right, for any individual house. But, if we're talking about a 100 amp circuit, or a, 19 kW level 2 charger at the house, that starts to get really significant really quickly. And so there are some similar projects that we're working on with utility partners to really understand what it looks like for residential transformer loading with these different pieces of charging equipment at the house as well. Because again, we just want to make sure that these loads are balanced. Speaking to really making sure that all the valleys or the gaps throughout our time of day is really filled efficiently. And these technologies, they don't have to, hit or achieve or pull these power levels for very long at all. And so there's a lot of room to work with here. But what it means is that it can't be a hands-off approach. We got to make sure that the hardware is right and that the program design is right to actually engage with those customers in the right places to help them shift that behavior.
Thank you so much. And I think you mentioned early in that response, and thank you for bearing with a very large question and working your way through that. Appreciate that very much. But you did mention kind of the combination of fast charging and level 2 and those kinds of things. And I want to come back to you, Emily, because I think, fast charging is key to those experiences, right? What does the consumer need? A lot of times when we have those conversations, right, it's like, I can't afford to spend basically longer than it would take to fill up my gas tank, that kind of thing, right? So there is a demand for that fast charging. And there is this notion of a combination, right? So how fast charging can really help with range anxiety with those that might be otherwise hesitant. And from your perspective, I'd love to hear about how IONNA is working with utilities around fast charging to deploy that technology more quickly. And I know you have an Apex example, but drawing from anywhere that you're working, how is that going?
Yeah, definitely. I think I started to get into this a little bit when I was talking about working with Tom, kind of pulling at Jacob and answering multiple things at once. But what I can say is I think we need all use cases. And from just kind of the collaborative effort here, it's up to the fast charging industry, level 2, all the manufacturers, utilities, and automakers as well. That's why we're partnered with automakers to provide the consumer that seamless experience. Because to them, as Jacob mentioned, it doesn't matter, where the issue came from. All they know is they want to have a reliable charging system. And so it's up to all of us to provide that. I think it's been great working practically with a lot of utilities are engaging to share kind of looking at power capacity with us. We look a lot early. We reach out all the time, checking on early kind of feasibility of, is this site going to work? Where is it not? And then working creatively to see where sites can work, where, maybe some of the issues you may have heard about in the past couple of years, especially our transformer lead times, or transformers will take a while to get here. And if we're looking at, as I said, a lot of chargers at one site. So most of our sites are kind of 10 to 20 charging bays. So that's 5 to 10 400 kilowatt chargers. You just look at that in the nameplate capacity, we could go over 2 megawatts. But realistically, are we going to be pulling all of that at one time? Very, very likely not the case. And so that's where someone like Tom team comes in, looks at kind of flexible load management. That's where we work with the utilities up front to determine, okay, well, we need the highest level transformer, and maybe we can dial it back to a 2500 kV or 2000 kV transformer. How can we work creatively to procure our own transformer and meet the specifications of the utility? Because in some parts of the country, they are still facing more of a lead time, or some utilities maintain their own inventory, some order it in. So depending who your supplier is, kind of helping navigate those supply chain issues is a big deal. And then also just kind of an example with Encore, for example, we were trying to address a transformer at a site, and there was kind of going to be issues with figuring out the pad mount transformers. Instead, we did multiple pole mount transformers. So it's just like kind of trying to be creative with our solutions on how we can be solution oriented moving forward, rather than just coming with, the initial no answer. So we've been working a lot, across the country with, as I said, with PG&E. We're connecting with them on how to get plugged into their Flex Connect pilot program. That's almost like a daily load management where they will track it up to the day before and give you that real-time data. We've been working with National Grid on getting kind of that energy capacity up front. And it's just great to kind of see those examples where we can work together. And I think it just brings us back to, thank you for inviting all of us to this panel, Deb, on kind of collaboration, because I think that really is kind of the key example there. It's just being able to have that conversation can really change the whole trajectory. So if you just, submit and leave it at the nameplate capacity, maybe it's a no for 2 years. you get on the phone and you have someone able to talk through kind of the real use case, then it might be we can have that up and running in 6 months. And for IONNA, that's that's our plan, and that's what we really want to drive is that base network for consumers as quickly as possible, because we're trying to meet the demand of today. So also just sure, we want to hear from folks on the call. If you're representing utility or anyone else, we want to engage at any level.
Thank you, Emily. And I'm actually I'm going to combine just panels so you know what I'm doing. I've been scanning the questions and answers and looking at some of the questions we had thought about talking about, and some of our discussion as we were preparing for this panel. And we have a question from Jim House about kind of the new administration and their approach in terms of supporting and challenging EV adoption, some of the federal grant announcements that have come out. And I will just, I'm going to spoiler alert. One of the things we talked about is that things are going to move. Things are moving, and not always necessarily because of federal programming. Sometimes it is, but also despite it. And the industry is moving. So, and this has an opportunity. There were all these projections. North Carolina is well beyond our projections in a lot of ways in terms of EV adoption. But Jim's question says, EVs have struggled to reach mass adoption. How do we think these policy shifts, industry shifts may influence adoption now and into the future? So, Tom, we haven't heard from you in a little while. Do you want to get started? And I want to make sure, Emily had a great answer for this on our call, and I know from the industry perspective, Emily and Jed, I definitely want to make sure I hear from you. But anyone who wants to answer this, I just know I can tell Tom's jumping out of his screen.
Well, I appreciate that. In the utility industry, it doesn't matter what the administration is. We have to continue to supply reliable, cost-effective power. And the way that the market is going and the way that we're responding and have our internal goals towards decarbonization, the path is set. Now, it may vary a little bit here and there, but really we're going in this direction. And I said to the panel before, I don't see a whole lot of examples of sort of novel innovation in the traditional ICE vehicles. So there's, corrections and minor adaptations and adoptions and, efficiencies coming in, various things. But if you look at some of the other markets, global markets like China and Europe, the technology is advancing incredibly quickly. And for for car manufacturing, China just announced a couple of the manufacturers going into full solid state battery production for their vehicles for sale. And that technology is a next step, potentially evolution. If you consider the light duty vehicle, if you get 300 to 400 miles range max right now, and you have the cost that you have, if you go to that technology, you may have half the weight of the battery system, have a significant drop in cost. And then, I've seen studies on 600 to 700 miles per charge. And so if you take that and say, oh, that's just your basic everyday car, and then you extrapolate that to medium and heavy duty markets like your last mile delivery Amazon trucks or your semis, even that technology innovation will drive the market in ways that we can't even predict at this point. And so, I'd sort of look to, I'll just make one last thing about the federal connection. So we do a lot of support with the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program out of the Fed, and it's run through the North Carolina DOT and the DOTs across the country. And we've been a early and often partner with them trying to set up the program. In the first phase, there was 9 sites identified in North Carolina, 9. And this is to connect driving spots on alternate fuel corridors so that folks have some surety about driving experience. But that's 9 stations. If I go back to earlier in the presentation, Emily talked about putting 1,000 in the next year ports in.
Yeah.
So if you simply compare those things, okay, federal program 9, Emily's organization 1,000. It's like, yeah, okay, I see that it has an effect, but at the same time, the market and what the public is asking for and adopting is driving a lot of the underlying opportunity and growth in the marketplace. And I could go into other stuff, but I'll let the other panelists weigh in on this as well.
Yeah, I can just jump in and pass to you, Jed. Just echoing Tom, that all infrastructure planning is something, very much including utility and EV charging infrastructure, has a long-term planning on the end, and that infrastructure is built to last. It's not going to suddenly change direction every couple of years. It's part of a larger process. And for IONNA's perspective, regardless of what's happening at the federal level, our plans remain the same. As I said, from these automakers, we're backed by private capital and industry, and we're moving forward with our plans. So plans are unchanged regardless of any kind of federal funding flux, I'll say, in terms of the charging programs. And yeah, we're meeting kind of the demand of today, and what we'll continue to do, we'll continue to grow and build more chargers, like we said, targeting 30,000 bays by 2030 based off of the demand. But we, could keep building our 1,000 bays this year, and we're still just meeting what demand is out there right now. So, as Jacob alluded to, you need both the level 2 and you need more of the fast charging, so more people can, take their road trip to see the sites, see their friends, see everything they want to do. So I'll pass it over to you, Jed, from the manufacturing side.
Yeah, so I agree with both. I think that there's some key industry trends that it really doesn't matter what the federal government does. It would be better for my business, obviously, if there were grant money out there in the short term. But long term, we still, you'll hear things about slowing, but it's slowing growth. It's not decline. So maybe if we thought there would be 2 million new registrations this year, now we're saying 1.6 million, but that's versus 1.3. So I mean, we're still seeing growth. Tom's slide showed a 5% tipping point. Our CEO always says 10, but the U.S. was at 8 last year. I think December and January were close to 9% new registrations. So we're really getting close to the point where it tips. And then to me, though, the thing that I think a lot of people ignore, and Tom mentioned it, is solid state or not, battery cost is coming down. And so, I bought my EV 2 years ago, and I kind of regret it sometimes that I weren't doing it now, because just I paid more. And as you get to that point, I tell people all the time about my experience. I work for a fast charging company. I love fast chargers, but I've publicly fast charged in 70,000 miles probably 12 times. Just my driving habits. Now I wake up every morning, my car's full. I've put a cabin air filter in it. That's the only maintenance, and a set of tires. They're just great vehicles. I think that's the other thing that people sometimes forget is you're driving a very easy to drive, pleasant to drive, cheap to drive car once you pay that cost. And when the batteries come down, it starts to become, just the momentum's too much. And then the last thing, I always say this, and I don't think I'm the tree hugger type really, but if a gallon of fuel, which weighs 8 pounds, when you burn that gallon of fuel, you put 20 pounds of CO2 into the air. And no matter what you believe about the environment or climate change, I just don't see how anybody can say that's good, that happens. And so, and then what Duke does in their dirtiest plant is nowhere near that ratio. It's just, you're driving a zero emission at the tailpipe, but a much, much lower emission vehicle at the grand scale. And if you just kind of do the math in your head, if you're doing a 20-mile commute to work and a 20-mile home, and you get 20 miles a gallon, that day you put 40 pounds of CO2 in the air. And by your respiration, you put 2, just to kind of give you so then start multiplying that times year, and you're quickly into tons. So you're starting to put the weight of elephants, into the air and CO2. We do have a responsibility there. And at some point, other countries are starting to see that, and it's a number I can never get out of my head. And I do try to remind people of that. It's just, and my wife has we're not fully electric here, but when I take her car I now think about that when I'm putting that, if I put 15 gallons of fuel in there, there's 300 pounds of CO2 I just stuck into the air. So it is something to think about.
Thanks, Jed. Jacob, I saw you come off of mute.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in to add that I think, we're at a point where EV charging generally is just good for business. Also, I think that we've got site hosts, and obviously that's true for everybody on this call and many interested stakeholders. You see the manufacturer investments that have held strong across the state, over the last many years. But that's also true for the site hosts that are choosing to put these chargers in the ground, right? Like we could call up the restaurants and the grocery stores and the convenience stores that have made these decisions and feel really affirmed in those decisions, over time, regardless of kind of maybe a changing tune from a federal administration. I do think that one thing that we'll kind of have to think about in this particular era is how to get maybe more creative with financing models to help these site hosts overcome really high capital cost, right? So there's been, and North Carolina has been a beneficiary of a really, really good Volkswagen mitigation settlement firm, like or program, I guess, that NCDEQ has been managing for quite some time. That program is now sunsetting. And so we are kind of losing access to, some of the different financing mechanisms. And so I think that's a place where, Duke Energy has the Charger Prep Credit Program. We're starting to see the emergence of charger, like a pay-as-you-save or, like a charging as a service model where essentially, maybe there's a little bit more of an opportunity to help these site hosts get infrastructure in the ground and start to reap the benefit of that without necessarily having to shovel out a really, really high kind of upfront capital cost that might sink a project that otherwise would have a lot of interest. And so I do think it is a time where, I'm not as worried about what will happen. I think to Tom's point, just the nature of scale of like, the state of North Carolina installed about 400 DC fast charging plugs last year through the various manufacturers. And so there's a lot happening, and that's going to continue to be the case. But we might have to get a little bit more creative about where some of that upfront capital comes from, and therefore who takes on the accountability to really make those projects work. So I think there is a lot of opportunity, but we might just have to pivot, with kind of the changing tunes and changing tides here.
Well, that was a wonderful round filled with hope and optimism. So thank you for that. And not surprisingly, right, industry and innovation tends to drive these things, right? A lot of times there is a market consistency that allows us to actually go where things are already in motion. So that is wonderful to hear. I want to make sure we get to some of the Q&A. And so I'm just looking through. Some of these are fairly specific. Some are others. Mark Smith wanted to get an extra round of applause for Jed's comments. So you've gotten some claps there. So there you go. So there are a couple questions, and I'm going to bounce around a little bit. Certainly, I think the answer, Jed, I think someone answered you, does Kempower offer a portable trailer mounted or skid mounted DCFC? And I think Mark answered for you, but do you want to just answer aloud for everyone?
Yeah, so we've got a movable charger. I think that Mark, I was looking at the question too. It plugs into a 408 volt connection. We have people that will put that in series on a trailer with a generator behind it. So we don't do that, but we've had people do it. We've also had people take, our distributed system and put it on a skid. It's not something you can buy directly from us, but we can get you in touch with a partner that can.
Thank you, Jed. Tom, this question's for you. Is Duke working with the co-ops that might be in these transportation corridors? And Charlie Nobles points out the co-ops are typically challenged in building some of this EV infrastructure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'll go back to the NEVI program example for a good sort of frame up of this. So in working with NCDOT, all of the relevant power partners were sort of brought in on the front edge at our asking and at our offer. And so I think I saw Jim on the call somewhere there, maybe. I don't know if he's still in.
Jim Muslick,
yeah,
he was on the participant list at some point anyway.
There you go. So in that process, we really try to sort of work with the DOT to understand where their areas of strategic focus were, and sort of map it out by who's got what area and how can we serve it best and consistently. And when you had a program like that, for example, you might have, sort of one level of information about where the identified sites that need to be served are and what the typical utility process is. And what we tried to do was sort of average out across all of our organizations, where, locate every site, understand whose territory it is, provide some sort of standardized guidance so that through the NCDOT, if you had tens of bidders coming in, they're all wanting to talk to different utility partners, not knowing what's going on. We're actually working together to provide that one direct conduit of information so that everybody sort of has the right level set basis to go from. And then as the process goes forward and awards are made, then you make individual connections with the different utility partners to try to be able to plan and get these things in the ground. And so that's a good example, I think, of like where across an entire jurisdiction or a state, there's, I think, a necessary and very beneficial cooperation between power partners. And I'll say that, just anecdotally and personally, I've been in the industry for a number of years now, and at no point previous have I had as much collaboration with other utility partners as I've had now. And I think, we're not fighting for shares here. We all have our own areas. And I think what we're trying to do is really crack the nut, understand the industry and understand the requirement. And as I like to say, and people have probably on the call mostly heard me say this, the electric utilities and the transportation sector were not bedfellows historically. We didn't know each other, didn't care about each other necessarily because we didn't really touch operations. But now we've been sort of pushed together in rapid succession. And so I think it's incumbent upon both sectors to really try to better understand the operational models of each so that we can work together mutually. And that really spans utilities, not just individual groups like Duke Energy.
Thanks, Tom. I just wanted to do a housekeeping reminder that you won't be able to, participants can't come off of mute to ask questions. There are a couple of folks that raised their hand. That's more an indication that you might want to add something to the Q&A. So if you do have a question and you haven't put it in the Q&A, please do so now. There is a question, this pivots us a little bit in talking about workforce. And this is something I mentioned that RTCC is very much in support of workforce development and making sure we have the talent to not only support the manufacturing side, but also the maintenance and operation. And so there was a question about EV repair tech availability. So are there workforce planning projects similar to what Tom was showing about EVSE location planning? And I have some answers for this because this is a space we work in, but I'm very curious also from the industry perspective. Jed and I were in the same room. Jed, Tom, and I actually were all in the same room. Was that last week or the week before? It's all blending together. I blame the snow. But essentially, are you feeling like we are going to have what we need on the workforce side in terms of making sure that as we build out this infrastructure, we're able to maintain it moving forward? Jed, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, we don't have a ton of workforce right now because we usually use partners to do that for us. So we've got 7 to 10 internal folks who we use to repair. But I mean, just to be candid, I think there's an awful lot of industry stealing from each other for employees right now. Pretty good time to be an employee that knows that we will need that going forward. I think that it's it is, and it's that like we've actually used some auto mechanics and trained them because they've just got the technical proclivity to do it and then kind of worked them through and paid for their education and stuff. So it's a pretty good time to be a 18-year-old that wants to do that kind of thing going forward. I'll say for sure we need more.
Yeah, I can say we have, nationwide, we're building out nationwide. So we've got kind of a network of maintenance contractors nationwide that can serve those stations. But as we build more and more, there's going to be more demand for that kind of workforce. And that's something, again, where I think that is a collaborative discussion. I'd love to hear what you have to say, Deb, but I know we've been having those conversations with folks like Tom mentioned, like EPRI and Edison Electric Institute as well. And kind of how can we work together collaboratively as an industry to promote some of that workforce development and help kind of maybe guide, I guess, if they're looking for kind of regionally and stuff where it's going to be coming online. But yeah, love to hear your thoughts as well. But yeah, definitely we'll need more as we keep building.
Jacob, I saw you come off mute. Those are my cues. Did you want to add to that as well?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
I'll let the actual operators and installers take that one.
Well, I think from my perspective, right, the room we were in was all about NCBCE here in North Carolina, organizes a sectoral partnership specifically focused on EV, everything from installers, M&O, all of those good things. There's a lot of additional effort. We're also part of a sectoral partnership, bringing industry together with those who can provide that talent around battery and energy storage. So these types of industry and making sure that the training is matching needs I feel like that is really strengthening, especially in North Carolina. We have an amazing community college system. We have Wake Tech with their EV training facility. This is really a priority. And one of the things I will say that for those of you who may have been engaging with community colleges much earlier in your careers, right, the design, industry-centered design around programs, curriculum is so strong right now. And I have to give credit to my many amazing colleagues in North Carolina around this. The conversations are just they are so focused on making sure that needs are being met on an ongoing basis. And so for those who might be part of industry on this call, who might not be involved, please let us know, reach out, because there are opportunities. And I will say, I joke that, to Jed's point, right? I go to this conference around advanced manufacturing. They're fighting for the same 20,000 workers that these are, and this 500,000. I mean, everybody's going after that. So thinking creatively about how we develop that workforce in terms of getting into getting as early as middle school and moving it up through, right? Changing the notion of what these jobs look like in this modern economy, as well as thinking about the fact that you're really going to, these students now emerging, right? The 18-year-olds are looking at perhaps having the stat that I heard, that I still, having been a career coach for a long time, that they're not just going to have 12 jobs, they're going to have 12 careers. I don't really know the distinction and if that makes sense, but essentially we need to be developing those critical thinking, technical skills, and then we can, the notion of reskilling and retooling and upskilling is going to be really key. Here in North Carolina, we also have a lot of retirees that come out of Fort Bragg, out of the military, as well as I've had many conversations around justice-involved individuals and how you actually can engage all sorts of different folks. There are all manner of ways to engage a workforce. And I mean, one of the things is making sure that North Carolina stays an amazing and attractive place to come. So anyway, you can tell I get really excited about this. But if anybody else wants to speak to workforce, we appreciate the question. And I think we're going to have to keep working on this. This is not going to be easy to solve, because we want to keep North Carolina manufacturers and charging infrastructure here. We need the people to keep it going.
I'll just make a super quick comment just to add sort of the thing that I would charge the audience to do as well is really, this is, if we're talking about, we're not just talking about a shift to a slightly different technology, we're talking about, foundational change and how all this works. And really, by the time this is all worked out, hopefully sooner than later, it's really not going to be our generation that's going to be doing it. It's really the future generations that are going to do it. So every opportunity that you have to discuss this with younger folks, and I'll hold up my, you probably can't see that, but my Future Cities mug.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm a judge at Future Cities, which is a competition where middle schoolers try to ideate about the world that they want to live in and the cities that they want to populate. Great opportunity. We have things here at Duke Energy where we bring a lot of middle schoolers to actually operation centers and show them all the various jobs that go on within the utility, because people become so accustomed to just having the service, but not thinking about what goes into it. And I'll say, and I think I'm not wrong here, that energy is cool at this point. And I don't know that when I was growing up, I thought that energy was cool. I don't think it was like an interesting thing, but because of the conditions on the ground, because we have hurricanes and weird snowstorms and all these things where the power infrastructure is more visible and vulnerable. And the market is changing where you put a kid in a car or an electric bus and it doesn't smell bad. And they can talk because it's quiet, and they can do these things like plug it in, and when the lights go out, potentially they can use the car to feed the house and get the power back on. These are all really interesting connections, I think, for kids, that they can look forward to a job that's both technical, sophisticated, rewarding, but also is trying to help set up a planet that's a better place for them to live. So I'd say don't leave out the younger kids whenever you can, especially around this, because this is very electric vehicle marketplace is very, or just vehicles in general, very tangible. Kids have experience with this from basically the day they're born. So it's something that you can grab onto and sort of describe to them.
I can just be a testament to the Future Cities program. It worked out. I was part of that program as a local here many, many years ago before we were talking about EVs, but yeah, recommend it for sure.
That's great. And today is Engineers Week Girls Day. So this is National Engineers Week. We just had Women in STEM Day a couple of weeks ago. I think having 2 women and 3 non-gray hairs on the panel is a huge shift. Well, thank you for that. That is a commitment that we like to make.
I know. We're getting close.
Nobody crusty. Everybody's young and vibrant here. Well, thank you for that comment. And I will say that I think, to your point, one of the things that we've also really, what we also need to keep in mind is it's not all technical, right? We need people in finance and real estate and HR and all of the functions working on these issues. And you can be, as we look at Gen Z coming into the workplace, right? We have a lot of very mission-oriented people trying to fix things that may be seen as challenges, and we need to harness that energy. So thank you. I would, maybe we can work together on that piece as well. I do want to there's one more kind of tactical question. I'm going to combine 2, and then I think we'll kind of wrap up on that. I just want to give all our panelists a heads up that I'm going to come to you for a last, 30-second to 1-minute comment that you want to leave everyone with in just a moment after this question. But there is a little bit of a combination about kind of gas stations and how this relates. So who pays for installation of gas stations now? Would that be a model that could work with EV? And would it make sense to have existing gas stations start transitioning to EV chargers, providing some incentives so that they are kind of a combined mental effort, or if not, so it's very similar to getting the gasoline or diesel? And
yeah,
Emily?
I can jump in to start, at least, and we can kind of pass around. I'll say for the IONNA perspective, we are both working to build our own sites and kind of the look and feel, I'll say, with the canopies, the lighting, the amenities, is designed to be quite similar in that kind of service station experience. So regardless of fuel, when someone's stopping, they probably want to get a snack. They probably want to use the restroom, stretch, maybe let their dog out, all the same kind of thing, regardless, we're all kind of needing the same functions. So we want to meet that standard. So we're building both standalone, kind of separate from fueling stations. And then we're also partnering with a lot of existing fueling stations. So folks like Wawa, Sheetz, places like that, we are building charging stations there as well. So we're, you'd use the same Wawa, or we're just next to the gasoline fueling stations. And I think it's about having both. So as kind of the use case of, we're kind of working with gas stations and others. And then to that point as well, I think it is about transitioning older properties and stuff. So this is maybe a little looping into my wrap up comment, but I think one of the things that we wanted to highlight is something Jacob mentioned, and a lot of states and federal funding has promoted some early EV adoption and EV charging infrastructure. And then what happens if some of those programs phase out, or even utilities, some originally were the ones installing EV chargers, and maybe they're no longer interested in being the maintainer of that charger, kind of what happens there. So this is just kind of a plug that, we want to engage with you too. And IONNA, there are other EV charging companies out there now like us who we want to hear about those sites. We want to come in, and we would be at all of our sites. So we're the ones owning, operating, maintaining those chargers. We're putting up the capital, not the site host. That wasn't always the case, depending on how things started in the past. And so I think there's an opportunity to kind of update some of those maybe legacy chargers that are out there from fast chargers that no longer have that maintenance. And so, if that's also a scenario you're in as a city, a county, just an industry representative out there, we want to hear from you and kind of hear where those needs are as well.
Thank you, Emily. And if it's okay with you, I will count that and we'll go into that round if that's okay. Yeah. That was wonderful. And I love the idea. Again, a theme, our tagline is transformation through collaboration, and that can be physical transformations like we're talking about today, kind of new business models, all of those things. So thank you for bringing that up. And hopefully there are some folks.
I'll just say the collaboration is key there to making that work as well. I just wanted to highlight someone from EPRI connected us to the Ameren utility, and they're the ones who gave us the sites that they wanted upgraded, so it's all about the collaboration. So I just want to again reiterate the collaborative nature of working across industry, and thanks for having us, Deb. I'll pass it over now.
Thanks. Jacob, I was going to come to you next if that's all right.
Yeah, sure. I'll jump in. So, there are a lot. I mean, I think as Emily mentioned, there are a lot of convenience store, kind of C-store operators that are doing a great job electrifying. Circle K has really come onto the scene over the last couple of years. You can see that in their deployments here in North Carolina and elsewhere. Sheets and others. Maybe one of my kind of closing points is the fact that getting to Tom's comment of kind of the future cities is, thinking beyond just the traditional like fuel service model too. It's like, where do you want as a driver to spend 20 to 30 minutes or 15 to 30 minutes of your time too? So, I certainly get excited when I see those C-store partners coming to the table and doing that in, kind of proactive and progressive ways. But there are also all of those other types of customer businesses and touch points that can do this with customers too. And so, I certainly am excited for those C-stores to keep that going, but also I like to think about as IONNA is like what does the future fueling station look like, and how can we make it fun and smell nice and be really pleasant to be at. It's a really, really nice thing to be basing our decisions around.
Well, that's wonderful. Speaking of the charging experience, Jed, I'll come to you next for your closing comments.
Yeah, I don't know if I really had anything planned other than just to say, I mean, I think there's a little bit of a tone right now of what's going on. And just to the earlier comments, I mean, it really is going to happen going forward. And I would just say, number one, believe about 2/3 of what you hear. There's this third out there that maybe less than that. This, if it sounds specious, it probably is. And then number two, if you've never driven an EV, I mean, like the next time you go like to rent something or borrow one, you really ought to have. There's all these, there's all these reasons, noble reasons to drive one, but they're super fun to drive. And I mean, just quiet and, even to the school. I used to work for the school bus company that Jacobs got there. And we found out that, when you have one with kids on it, they didn't talk as much because they weren't talking over a diesel engine. There's just all these other things that are great about EVs. And I would just encourage people to experience that if they haven't already.
Thanks, Jed. Although I do have to say the Mach-E, right? You can turn on the sound, the pretend sound.
I do, just so I know. And I've gotten a couple of tickets, and I want some reminder now that maybe I'm goosing it a little more than I need to.
Well, yes. The first time I rode in a Mach-E and they put that on, I was like, it was total cognitive dissonance. It was hilarious.
Yeah.
Tom, how about you for your final comments?
Sure. Yeah, and I'll piggyback off of a couple of the comments, actually all of them probably. To Jed's point, try it. I mean, and I experience this a lot internally, and so I do a lot of education for customers that I'm working with and sort of help them understand, where the industry's at and hopefully where it's going and how to make it work. But, Duke Energy is also transitioning our fleet too. And you've got that situation that was mentioned by Jed earlier about, historically, this is how we ran things. And we have mechanics here that have been here for 40 plus years, and they're not used to new systems, but they're used to really doing what they know how to do very well and very efficiently. And so I think part of that is, and I just had a recent experience at our operations center, I let some of our designers borrow one of our Lightnings that I had, and came back with like a laundry list of advantages for actually accessing sites, because they had smaller vehicles and they couldn't access them, and rough terrain, and they had no place to put their plans. And there was all these things that went along with it that they wouldn't have even thought about until they actually got in and drove the vehicle and really enjoyed it. And so I think that's really critically important. On the gas station side of things, I think we are used to fueling infrastructure that's sort of traditional around like dedicated spots, because that's like, big gas tanks, environmental concerns, like you can't put them in your backyard. You can't put them at your place of business. But the difference is that electricity and the electrical grid is everywhere. And so there are many ways and formats to actually charge vehicles. And so putting some at fast charging stations like IONNA runs, great application, because busy lives mean we're going to need to quick charge from time to time, or if we're traveling. But if you're going to the park in your local community and it's a little bit too far to drive or walk, or bike or walk, then you can take your electric vehicle, plug it in there, and have a nice time at the park. And it's not a dirty, chemically based, situation. You just simply plug in and go about your business. So I think there's a lot of different models out there. For the traditional fueling stations, their power is typically different than what's required for DC fast chargers. But that's really not a barrier per se if you talk to the utility, because if we're talking about who pays, when you put in DC fast charging at a gas station, for example, that's a new service from the utility. And many utilities recognize the fact and have been empowered by regulatory oversight to be able to bring capital to the equation. So that transformation, that big transformer equipment that you need to put in, for our operations in the Carolinas, for example, it's very infrequent that customers who are putting that equipment in pay anything at all. There's revenue that's associated with that as they bring more load onto the grid, and we are able to credit that back to them in the form of paying for equipment. And so we're doing what we can within our regulatory structure to be able to offset costs and make those things more feasible, cost effective. And then the last thing I'll say, just in terms of sort of bringing it all together, is everybody on this call is part of this ecosystem. We all have specific invested interests and scopes of work. And a lot of times, these industries are siloed, but not one of these panelists areas can work without the others. And so we're, I think for better and not worse, obligated to collaborate at this point, because if we didn't, things wouldn't work. They just wouldn't. Historically, we could just do our own thing in our own silos and it's fine, but we're contingent partners. It's the legs of the stool situation. If you're missing one of the legs, you fall over when you go to sit down. So I think it's the interconnection of electricity in this equation actually is honestly a benefit towards collaboration, I would say, in my experience.
I was chuckling a little to myself there, Tom, because as somebody who sometimes just falls over, even if there are three legs to the stool, it is absolutely essential that we continue to work together. With that, Megan, if you can just, I want to say thank you so much to our amazing panelists, Tom, Jed, Emily, Jacob. Thank you for sharing this. Thank you for your flexibility. Audience, thank you for your flexibility in the format. I know that we want to make sure that we see each other soon. And with that, I do want to put up our closing slides. Megan, if you're able to do that, yes, thank you. Just to remind everyone, thank you for being with us today. And then there are a few reminders. We were able to actually change our reservation at the Arboretum to March 19th. So we basically pushed back a month. You will please mark the date. We are rapidly coming up with our programming for that date, and you will hear from us very soon about that. We are very excited, and we would love to see you there in person. We also want to encourage you to join us at the UNC Cleantech Summit at the end of March and the State Energy Conference of North Carolina at the end of April. So this is, again, one of the many busy seasons for our field. And we are excited to see you and engage with you in person. And we do have some more event announcements that will be coming out soon. And finally, just to close with our engagement slide, I do want to remind you that we have lots of ways to engage, and we are always thrilled to bring more organizations and individuals into our ecosystem and landscape. With that, we'll leave that up. I'm laughing because I now have a dog and a daughter here that have reached their tolerance, and hopefully all of the adults on this call can now move on to the other things in the afternoon. And again, we so appreciate that. Stay safe out there. Please stay safe and warm and enjoy yourselves. Thank you again to our panel. Round of applause. And thank you to everyone who joined us this afternoon. On behalf of RTCC and the Cleantech ecosystem, we are grateful for your work. Take care.